Wow! And it is all over!
UFC 240 went down this past weekend in Edmonton, and in the main event, we saw Max Holloway defeat Frankie Edgar via unanimous decision after 5 rounds. Pretty convincing unanimous decision, in my eyes at least. In the co-main event, we saw Cyborg beat Felicia Spencer in what was another pretty comfortable unanimous decision, I would say, this time after 3 rounds. One thing about that fight, without a doubt, Felicia Spencer proved that she has crazy heart and crazy toughness. Cyborg hit her with some bombs, and some of those shots that she landed on Felicia Spencer probably would have put down a lot of other opponents in the 145 division. But let's be honest, there's not really too many fighters in the women's 145-pound division in the UFC. So I'll just say a lot of those shots that Cyborg landed on Felicia Spencer probably would have taken down a lot of her past opponents. So props to Felicia Spencer. She brought the fight to Cyborg, man. She kept getting hit and she kept coming forward. She is a beast, no doubt about that. I think she only has like 8 professional fights. That was her first loss. But she did a lot better than I thought she would do, so I think she definitely has a very bright future ahead of her. She tried pretty relentlessly to take Cyborg to the ground. She got closer than I thought she would, honestly, but unfortunately she still was not able to do so, and because of that, the fight took place on the feet the entire duration of it, which without a doubt is Cyborg's domain. So taking that into consideration, once again, I was extremely impressed by Felicia Spencer's toughness and heart. Aside from that though, the question is, what is next for Cyborg? That was her last fight remaining on her current UFC contract, so where does she go from here? If you ask me, there's pretty much only 2 options, and that is leave the UFC, head to Bellator, and fight Julia Budd. I'd love to see that fight. I think it's a great fight. I think it's a great matchup. I think Julia Budd, if you guys aren't familiar with her, use Google. She is a pretty big fighter herself. She's a legit 145-pound fighter. I think she's the same height as Cyborg, either 5'8" or 5'9". She's pretty jacked, and she only has 2 professional losses. She's like 14-2. She hasn't lost since 2011, and that last loss was via armbar to Ronda Rousey. Before that, her other loss is to current women's GOAT Amanda Nunes, and that fight was also in 2011. So aside from those, she has not lost in 8 years. So she's been quite dominant herself lately. I would absolutely love to see that fight, but like I said, if that happens, that means Cyborg will have to leave the UFC and go to Bellator, which is definitely a pretty strong possibility, because if you guys keep up to date with current news, especially regarding Cyborg, you know that Cyborg and the UFC, especially Dana White, have always had a relatively rocky relationship, and it doesn't seem to have gotten any better recently. I keep hearing Dana White say over and over again that Cyborg doesn't want the Amanda Nunes rematch, which I think is 100% bullcrap. She's came out and said numerous times that she does in fact want the rematch. I think the only holdup is the contract negotiations. Dana White is most likely saying she doesn't want the rematch because Dana White wants her to sign a contract that Cyborg doesn't agree with. What it all likely comes down to is money. Dana White probably doesn't want to pay Cyborg what she feels she is worth, and therefore he's using the excuse of Cyborg doesn't really want the Amanda Nunes rematch because she's afraid of another loss, she's afraid of this, afraid of that. Let's be honest, it probably, like a lot of things in life, comes down to money. If the money's right, I'm sure Cyborg 100% wants that rematch. She wants to avenge that loss, and she is more than willing to do so if, like I said, the money's right. So in my opinion, those are the only 2 options that make any sense at all. In a perfect world, I would love to see the Amanda Nunes rematch first, and then after that, I would love for the UFC to somehow sign Julia Budd, even though she's the current champ in Bellator. That would be awesome, because I'd love to see both of those fights. Like I said, I think the Cyborg-Julia Budd matchup would be a great matchup, a great fight, and I would love, like many other people, to see that Amanda Nunes rematch, because although the first fight was extremely entertaining, it was really short, and I don't think we really got to see all too much. It really came down to who landed first. And obviously Amanda Nunes landed, well, she landed first, second, third, fourth. She hit Cyborg with a ton of hard shots until she eventually landed that kill shot that pretty much face-planted Cyborg. So if there were to be a rematch, and I think, honestly, I think there will be somewhere down the road, hopefully sooner rather than later, I think Cyborg is going to approach the fight completely different. I think she'll be a lot more cautious. She won't be nearly as aggressive. And I think it will be a lot better fight. I'm not saying Cyborg will win, but I think it will be a lot more competitive, And honestly, I think it's still a toss-up. I think it's still a 50-50 fight, and it's still one that I really hope happens. Let me know what you guys think about that. Who do you think should be next for Cyborg? Do you agree with me? Do you think it should be the Amanda Nunes rematch? Or maybe the Julia Budd fight? Or maybe there's someone I'm completely missing? So let me know down below who you think should be next for Cyborg. Aside from that, like I said, the other big fight on last weekend's UFC 240 card was Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar, which I came out with a video maybe a month or so ago when that, maybe more than that, when that matchup was first announced. And my video was pretty much calling out the matchup as a ridiculous matchup. And that's still what I 100% believe. I think that's what it turned out to be. I love Frankie Edgar as a fighter. He seems like a great person, but there is no way he deserved that title shot. He was coming off a brutal knockout loss to Brian Ortega 2 fights ago, and the fight before that, he beat Cub Swanson, who himself was on like a 4-fight losing streak. So how he somehow deserved a title shot against a dominant champion in Max Holloway, I have no idea. The fight made absolutely no sense. You had a great, clear-cut #1 contender in Alexander Volkanovski, who just defeated the legend of the 145-pound division and arguably the GOAT of the division in Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo had absolutely no answers for Volkanovski. Before that, Volkanovski knocked out someone else you may have heard of that's been very dominant in the 145-pound division for years, and that guy is Chad Mendes. So those were Volkanovski's most 2 recent fights, his most 2 recent wins, and if you compare those to Frankie Edgar's most recent fights, there's absolutely no comparison at all. You can go back a little further even, and Alexander Volkanovski hasn't lost in something like 10 years or something. So to me, if you compare their resumes, there was no comparison. Alexander Volkanovski was so far ahead of Frankie Edgar as far as the legit #1 challenger. It just made no sense, man. It's completely mind-blowing. I don't know what they were doing. I heard something like Dana White said Frankie Edgar deserved it because he took that Brian Ortega fight when he didn't need to. I mean, that's cool and all, but he did get paid for the fight. He knew what he was signing up for going into it. He knew that he was risking his shot at a title when he took that Brian Ortega fight. And you know, that was a risk at the time that he was willing to take. Unfortunately, it didn't pay off for him, or you know what? I guess it did, because he got the title shot anyways. And you guys saw how that fight went down. For some reason, some judge scored it 48-47 Max Holloway, which I think is absolutely crazy. I think at the very most, I am not a Frankie Edgar hater by any means, but let's keep it real here. At the very most, maybe Frankie Edgar won 1 round. Maybe, and that's being extremely generous. Max Holloway dominated the fight. He looked like he was on cruise control for a lot of the fight, to be honest, and it just wasn't really that competitive, which going into it, I didn't think it would be. But I do think a fight with Alexander Volkanovski will be fireworks. I think it will be extremely competitive, and I think it will be Max Holloway's toughest challenge up until this point on his current reign, which is now what, like 13 or 14 wins in a row in the UFC's 145-pound division. His last loss being against Conor McGregor in, I don't even know what year that was. So yeah, he's been extremely dominant as a 145er for a long time, but I think Alexander Volkanovski might have something to say about that. So that fight better be next. Hopefully it is. If it is, I think it'll be a great fight. I've heard other people say maybe Zabit should get the next shot. I'll be honest, Zabit's a great fighter. He's got a ton of potential, but I think there's still a lot of question marks when it comes to his skills as a fighter. I think he needs maybe 1 or 2 more tune-up fights, maybe even just 1 more fight. We'll see how he looks in his next fight. And then after that, maybe he could get the next title shot. But just like I said with Frankie Edgar, if you compare Zabit's resume and like his last 5 UFC fights, compare that to Alexander Volkanovski's last 5 fights, there's probably not much of a comparison. So in my opinion, the only fight that makes sense next for Max Holloway, if he's going to stay at 145 pounds, is Alexander Volkanovski. Let me know what you guys think about everything I just talked about. Let me know who you think should be next for Max Holloway. Should it be Alexander Volkanovski, or maybe there's someone that's slipping my mind that I'm not thinking of that has a legit claim to the #1 contender spot? Let me know what you think below. And aside from that, I'll be honest, the UFC 240 card was not stacked by any means. There were a couple good scraps, but there weren't really too many performances that stood out to me. So that's gonna be a wrap for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the fights. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
My goodness! Oh my God. Just like that. That is some serious power.